The night the blizzard swallowed Harlan County, Kentucky whole, the temperature dropped to 31 below zero with the wind chill, and every sensible person within 50 miles was behind a locked door, with their heat running and their curtains drawn. Roads had been closed since 4 in the afternoon. The county sheriff had put out a recorded message on the emergency line telling people to stay inside and stay put, that this was not a storm you tested yourself against and won. Power lines were coming down on the east side of the county. 3 separate accidents had shut down Route 9 completely. The whole valley had gone dark and quiet the way it only does when something serious has taken hold of the weather and decided not to let go. On a narrow dead-end street called Sycamore Hollow Road, in a small white clapboard house that had been standing since 1961, a 72-year-old woman named Dorothy Mae Simmons was doing what she did every winter evening when the weather got bad. She was cooking, not because she was hungry, not because anyone was coming over, but because cooking was the thing her hands knew how to do when the world outside got uncertain, and Dorothy Mae Simmons had learned a long time ago to trust what her hands knew. She had a pot of beef stew on the back burner, thick with potatoes and carrots from the garden she still kept every summer behind the house, even at 72, even alone. She had cornbread in the cast-iron skillet in the oven. She had coffee going in the same percolator she had owned since 1987, a dented aluminum thing that her late husband James had tried to throw away twice, and she had rescued both times from the trash can outside. It still made the best cup of coffee she had ever tasted, and she had told James so, and he had laughed and said that was the most stubborn thing he had ever heard a person say about a coffee maker, and she had told him that stubborn and right were not mutually exclusive, and he had laughed harder. James had been gone for 9 years. Pancreatic cancer, fast and terrible, the kind that gives you almost no time to make peace with it before it is over. Dorothy Mae had held his hand on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and then come home to this house and sat in the kitchen for 6 hours without moving, and then on Wednesday morning she had gotten up at 5:15, made coffee in the percolator, fed the 2 cats that lived on her porch, and begun the long work of continuing. She was good at continuing. It was perhaps the thing she was best at. The house on Sycamore Hollow Road was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened into a living room, with a fireplace that Dorothy Mae kept burning from October through March. James had built the front porch himself in 1983, wide planks Douglas fir, that he had sanded by hand on a series of summer weekends, and the porch still felt solid underfoot, though the paint was peeling in the corners and 2 of the boards near the steps needed replacing and had needed replacing for 3 years. Dorothy Mae had the lumber in the garage. She just had not yet found someone willing to do the work for what she could afford to pay them, which was not very much. Her situation was not dramatic in the way that poverty sometimes gets described when people who have never experienced it try to explain it to other people who have never experienced it. It was not sudden or crisis-shaped. It was the slow grinding arithmetic of a fixed income in a world where nothing else was fixed. Her Social Security check was $1,087 a month. Her property taxes had gone up twice in 3 years. Her prescription costs had gone up 4 times. The roof over the back bedroom had developed a soft spot last spring that the roofer had told her would become a serious problem within 18 months if she did not address it, and she had thanked him politely and put the estimate in the kitchen drawer, where she put things she could not yet figure out how to solve. She was not a woman who complained. This was not stubbornness exactly, though stubbornness was part of it. It was more that she had grown up in a family where you handled what was in front of you, without making it a larger story than it needed to be, and that habit had become so deeply ingrained over 72 years that she genuinely could not locate a version of herself that would do it differently. You made do. While you were making do, you found someone who needed more help than you did, and you helped them. That was the operating principle. That was what her mother had taught her, and what she had tried to teach her own 2 children, both of whom lived far away now, her son Marcus in Portland and her daughter Renee in Atlanta, both of them good people with busy lives and children of their own, both of whom called every Sunday and worried about her living alone in the house on Sycamore Hollow Road, and both of whom she reassured every Sunday with complete sincerity that she was perfectly fine. She was mostly perfectly fine. She fed the Abernathy children on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, while their mother worked a double shift at the plastics factory on the edge of town. She brought food to old Gerald Patterson down the block when she knew he was having a bad week with his hip. She had organized the last 3 neighborhood yard sales, as fundraisers for the elementary school's book drive because the school district had cut the library budget 2 years running, and Dorothy Mae Simmons considered that a problem that required a response. She did not have money to give. She had time and she had energy, and she had the particular kind of social authority that accumulates over decades of showing up for people without making a production of it, and she used all three without hesitation. The night of the blizzard, she had checked on Gerald Patterson at 3 in the afternoon before the roads got bad, left him a covered plate of the stew she had started that morning, made sure his kerosene was full, and walked back home through the first light snowfall, with her coat collar up, and her mind already moving to the next thing that needed doing. Back home she filled every pot and pan with water, in case the pipes threatened to freeze. She checked the firewood stacked on the porch, enough for 2 days if she was careful. She banked the fire higher than usual, set the kerosene's space heater running in the back bedroom as a backup. Then she did something she could not have explained if anyone had asked her to. She went to the hall closet, reached up to the top shelf, and brought down a stack of old quilts, 4 of them, heavy wool and cotton, made by her mother and her grandmother, and one by Dorothy Mae herself in her 30s, when she had gone through a quilting phase that James had teased her about relentlessly. She carried them to the living room and draped them over the back of the sofa and the armchair. She looked at them for a moment. Then she went back to the kitchen to check on the stew. She did not know why she had done it. She would understand by morning. By 7 o'clock the storm was something else entirely. The wind had moved from loud to violent, a sustained screaming sound in the power lines that Dorothy Mae had not heard in years, the kind of sound that made the house feel smaller and more fragile than it usually did. The snow was coming horizontally, not falling so much as being thrown, and visibility beyond the front window was essentially nothing, just white movement and darkness behind it. The power had gone out at 6:43, the whole street going dark simultaneously, and Dorothy Mae had lit the oil lamp on the kitchen table, and the 2 candles on the mantel, and settled in by the fire with her Bible and her coffee, and the particular equanimity of a woman who had been through enough winters to know that they ended. She was not thinking about anything in particular when Barnabas, her old orange tabby cat, lifted his head from the armchair cushion and looked at the front door with his ears forward. Dorothy Mae looked at the cat. Then she looked at the door. Then she heard it. 3 knocks, heavy. The kind of knock a large hand makes on a solid door when the person attached to that hand is not entirely sure the sound is going to carry through the storm. Dorothy Mae set her Bible on the end table. She picked up the flashlight from the shelf beside the fireplace, the one she kept there specifically for power outages, and she walked to the front door. She put her hand on the deadbolt. She looked through the small window in the upper portion of the door, but could see nothing through it. The glass fogged with cold and the darkness outside absolute. She unlocked the deadbolt. She opened the door. The cold that came through the opening was immediate and total. The kind of cold that does not just touch your skin but goes directly into your chest, and behind it, standing on the porch that James had built in the summer of 1983, were 6 men. They were large men, all of them, broad-shouldered and tall, the kind of physical presence that fills a porch the way furniture fills a room. They were dressed in heavy leather, motorcycle club vests worn over thick jackets, the patches on their backs half obscured by ice and packed snow. One of them was leaning against the porch railing, in a way that suggested he would not be leaning if he had a choice. The man at the front, the one closest to Dorothy Mae, had a silver beard caked with ice crystals and eyes that were red-rimmed from cold and wind, and he was looking at her with an expression that combined profound relief and profound apology in roughly equal measure. His name was Raymond Briggs. He was 58 years old. He was the president of the Harlan County chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. He had been riding for 34 years. He had ridden through rain and heat and the particular miserable cold of early spring mountain roads, but he had never, not once in 34 years, been caught in anything like what had come down on Route 9 tonight. "Ma'am," Raymond said. His voice was rough and compressed, a man working hard to sound controlled, when nothing in his body felt controlled. "I am deeply sorry to come to your door like this. We had an accident on the highway. Our bikes are down. One of my men is hurt and 2 more are showing early signs of frostbite. We have been walking for almost 2 hours." He paused, and Dorothy Mae could see in the pause the particular difficulty of a proud man asking for what he needed. "We just need to get out of the cold. If you could let us wait on your porch until I can reach someone by phone, that would be more than enough." Dorothy Mae looked at him. She looked at the man leaning against the railing, whose name was Curtis, and whose left arm had a tear in the jacket sleeve, through which dark blood was visible, even in the dim light of the flashlight. She looked at the man beside Raymond, whose name was Delbert, who was holding his hands inside his jacket and shaking with a violence that was past, shivering, and into something more serious. She looked at all six of them, their ice-crusted beards, and their Hell's Angels patches, and their sighs, and their obvious, undeniable, desperate cold. She opened the door wider and stepped back. "Get in here," she said, "all of you. Right now mind the cat." Barnabas had appeared at her ankle and was observing the situation with the detached scientific interest that cats bring to unexpected developments. The first man through the door stepped carefully around him. Barnabas sniffed the man's boot, and then walked back to the armchair with dignity. They came in one by one, filling her small living room the way large objects fill small spaces, displacing the air, rearranging the geometry of the room around them. Snow melted off their shoulders and boots onto the linoleum. The room filled immediately with the smell of wet leather and cold road, and the particular sharp smell of men who have been frightened and cold for a long time and are only now beginning to allow themselves to stop being either of those things. Dorothy May closed the door behind the last one, threw the deadbolt, and turned to face them. She looked at Curtis first, the cut on his arm. "Come to the kitchen table," she said. "Sit down." Curtis looked at Raymond. Raymond nodded. Curtis followed Dorothy May to the kitchen. She went to the cabinet under the bathroom sink and came back with a first aid kit, a proper one, well stocked, the kind a woman keeps when she has raised 2 children and lived alone for 9 years and believes in being prepared. She sat across from Curtis and took his arm gently, pushed back the torn sleeve, and looked at the wound in the oil lamplight. It was a road rash laceration, deep in 2 places, the kind you get when leather meets asphalt at speed. It needed proper medical attention and stitches, but it was not going to kill him tonight if she cleaned it properly and kept it bound. "This is going to hurt," Dorothy May said. Curtis was a man who had, by his own accounting later, been in situations that made this moment look trivial. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She cleaned it with peroxide, working steadily and without hurry, the way she had cleaned scrapes and cuts on 2 children for 20 years. Curtis did not make a sound. She packed it with gauze, wrapped it tight, secured it with medical tape. Then she patted his hand once and stood up. "You need a real doctor when the road's open," she said. "That is going to need stitches. You understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," Curtis said. He sounded like a man who was having difficulty processing the situation he was in, which was understandable given the situation he was in. Dorothy May went to the living room. Delbert, the one with the frostbite hands, was sitting on the floor near the fireplace with his jacket off, and Raymond was beside him doing what you are supposed to do for frostbite, which is applying gentle warmth and not rubbing. Raymond had done this before. Dorothy May noted that he had done this before, and adjusted her assessment of him accordingly. She went to the kitchen and turned up the stove, added more wood to the fire through the insert, then came back with the stack of quilts from the sofa and the armchair. She handed them out without comment, one to each man. The last one she kept back and took to Delbert herself, wrapping it around his shoulders, and then kneeling on the linoleum floor and taking his hands between her own palms. She was 72 years old, 5 feet 3 inches tall, and she was kneeling on the kitchen floor, rubbing the hands of a 6'2" Hell's Angel back to warmth. Delbert looked at her with an expression that Dorothy May would later describe to her daughter Renee as the look a man gets when something happened to him that has reorganized his understanding of how the world works. She rubbed until the color began to return. Then she looked up at him. "Can you feel that?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Delbert said, his voice unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with the cold anymore. "Good," Dorothy May said. She stood up, brushed off her knees, and went back to the kitchen to see about the food. The stew she had made for herself that evening had been intended to provide 2 dinners and a lunch. She looked at the pot, then at the 6 men in her living room. She added water from the filled pots she had set aside for the pipes. She added the second can of diced tomatoes from the cabinet. She added the last of the dried kidney beans she had soaked that morning for an entirely different purpose. She cut up the remaining 2 potatoes from the bin and added those. She turned the heat up and stirred it all together, and then she put the second pan of cornbread in the oven. Raymond appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had taken off his outer jacket and was holding his helmet under his arm. Without the ice and the emergency context, he was a large, composed man with careful eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to being responsible for other people. He looked at the stove, at the pot, at the second pan going into the oven. His voice was quiet. "Please do not go to that trouble. It is already on the stove. Dorothy May said without turning around. So it is not trouble anymore, it is just dinner. Sit down if you want to sit, or go back to the fire. Either way, food will be ready in 20 minutes. Raymond stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he said, "My name is Raymond Briggs. We are the Harlan County Hells Angels. I want you to know who is in your house." Dorothy May turned around and looked at him. "I know who the Hells Angels are," she said. "I have lived in Harlan County for 50 years." She held his gaze. "Are you going to cause me trouble?"
Raymond Briggs?
Raymond looked at her steadily. "No, ma'am," he said, "we are not." "Then sit down," Dorothy May said. She turned back to the stove. Raymond sat down at the kitchen table, in the chair that had been James's chair for 31 years, and Dorothy May Simmons fed the Hells Angels. She served them in her good bowls, the blue ones she used for company, with the cornbread cut into wedges and put on a separate plate in the center of the table. She poured coffee for everyone who wanted it, which was everyone. She did not make a bowl for herself, telling the man named Hector when he asked that she had eaten earlier. She had not. She sat at the counter with her coffee and watched them eat, and felt the particular satisfaction of watching people who are very hungry eat food that is warm and good. The conversation that developed over those bowls of stew was not what Dorothy May expected, though later she would not have been able to say precisely what she had expected. What she got was 6 men talking to her the way men talk when they are warm and fed after being cold and frightened, with an honesty and an openness that the ordinary social structure of things does not usually allow. Raymond told her about the memorial ride, the brother they had lost the previous spring, after 18 months of fighting a cancer that had no interest in being fought. A man named Willis, who had ridden with them for 26 years, and whose absence had left particular shape in the club that none of them had yet figured out how to fill. They did this ride every year on the anniversary of his death, same route, same group, because Willis had loved this particular stretch of Kentucky highway in the fall, when the trees turned, and the light came down through them, a certain way that Willis had always said made him feel close to something he could not name. Dorothy May listened to all of it. She asked about Willis, what kind of man he had been, what he had been like to ride with. Raymond told her. The other men added things, small specific details, the kind that accumulate around a person over decades of closeness, and Dorothy May understood from the way they spoke that Willis had been genuinely loved, not just respected or relied upon, but loved, and that his absence was a real and present grief that they were all carrying in their own ways. Curtis, whose arm she had bandaged, told her about his daughter in Lexington, 11 years old, who wanted to be a veterinarian and had already decided on a specialty, large animals, because she had seen a documentary about wild horses and had never recovered from it. Hector told her about the motorcycle repair shop he ran in Harlan, 30 years in the same building, how he had started it with $800 and a borrowed set of tools, and how the business had grown in ways he had not imagined, and how some nights he still walked in and could not quite believe it was his. A quiet man named Deke, who had not said much through the meal, showed her a photograph on his phone of a vegetable garden, an enormous, meticulously organized garden that took up most of his backyard, and explained in careful detail the particular soil composition he had worked out over 12 years of trial and error for growing heirloom tomatoes in Kentucky clay. Dorothy May told them about James, about the porch he had built and the garden she still kept, and the percolator she had rescued, twice from the trash. She told them about Marcus in Portland and Renee in Atlanta, and how the house was quiet in a way she had made her peace with, but that she noticed most on winter evenings when the weather was bad and the fire was going. She told them about the Abernathy children and old Gerald Patterson and the school library book drive, and Raymond listened to all of it with the focused attention of a man who was genuinely interested in what he was being told. It was Raymond who noticed the bucket. He had gotten up to use the bathroom, and on his way back through the hallway he had seen it, a 5-gallon plastic bucket positioned precisely under a water stain on the ceiling, a stain that had the particular circular shape of a long-standing leak. He had not said anything at the time. He had come back to the kitchen and sat down and drunk his coffee and continued the conversation, but Dorothy May saw his eyes move to the ceiling when he sat back down, and she saw him make the small, almost imperceptible notation that careful people make when they have filed something away. She saw him look at the plastic sheeting she had taped over the kitchen window 2 winters ago, the tape yellowing now, one corner lifting. She saw him look at the space heater running in the doorway to the back hall, doing the work that a furnace should have been doing. She saw him see all of it, not intrusively, not with pity, but with the quiet, comprehensive attention of someone who's building a complete picture. Dorothy May had spent 50 years noticing when people were being looked at with pity and when they were being looked at with something else. Raymond Briggs was not looking at her situation with pity. He was looking at it the way a man looks at a problem he is already beginning to think about solving. She did not say anything about this. She refilled his coffee. By 11 o'clock, the storm outside was still going, but the men inside were warm and fed, and the immediate crisis had resolved itself into the simpler challenge of waiting out the weather. Raymond had managed to reach his road captain by phone, once the signal briefly cleared, long enough to convey their location and situation, and to establish that no one was going to be reaching them until morning when the plows came through. Dorothy May had told them they could stay, and she had said it in the tone she used when a thing was decided and further discussion was not necessary. She made up sleeping arrangements with the efficiency of a woman who had run a household for decades. The sofa and the armchair for 2 men. The 2 quilts that were left, spread on the living room floor near the fire for 2 more. She put Curtis in the back bedroom, his arm elevated on a pillow the way she had told him to keep it, with the space heater aimed at him, and strict instructions to wake her if the bandage soaked through. Delbert, whose hands were recovering, but who she wanted to keep an eye on, she put in the other armchair near the fire, with his feet elevated on the ottoman. Raymond she found standing at the mantel, looking at James's photograph. It was a good photograph, taken in the summer of 1998 at Marcus's high school graduation. James in a blue shirt with his arm around Dorothy May, both of them squinting into the sun and laughing at something that had just been said, the particular unstaged laughter of people who are genuinely happy in a moment. "That your husband?" Raymond asked. "James," Dorothy May said. She came to stand beside him and they looked at the photograph together for a moment. "Good face," Raymond said. "Yes," Dorothy May agreed. "He had a good face." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "Willis," he said, "the man we were riding for tonight. His wife kept a photo on their mantel too." He paused. "Same kind of photo. The kind where the person looks exactly like themselves." He said it carefully. "The way you say something that means more than the words it is made of." Dorothy May nodded. She understood exactly what he meant. She left Raymond in the living room and went to the kitchen. It was past 11 and she had not slept and she was not going to sleep, not with 6 people in her house, and Curtis's arm needing checking and the fire needing tending through the night. She made fresh coffee and sat at the kitchen table with it, and looked at the oil lamp flame, and listened to the storm work itself out against the walls of the house that James had lived in for 30 years, and that she had lived in for 9 years without him. She thought about the bucket in the hallway, and the soft spot on the back roof, and the furnace estimate in the kitchen drawer. She thought about the 2 potatoes she had added to the stew and the second pan of cornbread, and how the kitchen cabinet was going to be thin for the rest of the week. She thought about none of this with bitterness. It was just arithmetic. You worked with what you had. While you were working with what you had, you found someone who needed more help than you, and you helped them. That was the operating principle. It had not failed her yet. At 3 in the morning she got up and made biscuits. She could not have told you why exactly. The men were asleep. No one had asked for anything. But her hands knew what to do when a situation was serious, and when morning was coming, and when people in her house were going to need to eat. And so she mixed the flour and the buttermilk and the cold butter, and worked the dough on the floured board in the oil lamplight while the storm pushed against the windows and the fire settled in the living room, and 6 large men slept under her grandmother's quilts. She covered the pan with a clean dish towel and set it on the counter. Then she sat back down at the kitchen table, wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, and waited for the morning. She did not know that waiting for the morning was the last ordinary thing she was going to do for quite some time. She did not know that the man sleeping in James's armchair in her living room was not, in the ordinary sense of the phrase, just a biker. She did not know that Raymond Briggs, president of the Harlan County Hells Angels, was also the majority owner of Briggs Industrial Group, a construction and infrastructure company headquartered in Lexington, with operations in 7 states and annual revenues that would have made the number on her Social Security check look like a rounding error. She did not know any of this. She knew that there were biscuits on the counter and people in her house who were going to be hungry in the morning, and that the fire needed one more log before she let herself close her eyes in the armchair by the window for a few hours. She got up and put the log on the fire. Barnabas appeared from somewhere and settled on her lap when she sat back down. The storm made its sounds against the house. The house held. Dorothy Mae Simmons closed her eyes and waited for the morning to show her what it had in mind. The morning came in slowly, the way mornings do after serious storms, gray light filtering through the plastic-sheeted windows without any particular enthusiasm, the world outside muffled and rearranged by 2 feet of snow that had settled over everything during the night, and was now simply sitting there, patient and absolute, waiting for the county plows to come and make their negotiations with it. Dorothy Mae had dozed in the armchair for perhaps 3 hours, Barnabas solid and warm on her lap, and she was up before the light fully arrived, moving quietly through the house, the way she always moved in the early morning, with the particular unhurried efficiency of a woman who had been the first person awake in her household for 50 years, and had long ago made peace with that particular solitude. She checked Curtis first, found him sleeping with his arm elevated exactly as she had told him, the bandage clean, no soak through. She checked the fire, added 2 logs, adjusted the damper. She checked the kerosene heater in the back hall, still running. She checked the bucket in the hallway. A small amount of meltwater from where the snow had pushed against the roof. Not bad. Then she went to the kitchen, and lit the stove, and put the biscuits in the oven to warm, and started a fresh pot of coffee, and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the white-covered yard, and the buried street beyond it, and the absolute stillness of a world that had been fully stopped by weather, and was only now beginning to consider the possibility of starting again. Raymond was the first one up. She heard him before she saw him, the deliberate, quiet movements of a large man, trying not to wake the people around him, and then he appeared in the kitchen doorway in his socks, with his hair pushed to one side from the armchair, and his eyes already fully alert in the way of a man whose mind does not require much transition time between sleeping and thinking. He looked at the coffee pot, then at Dorothy Mae, then at the oven. "You were up all night," he said. "It was not a question." "I slept some," Dorothy Mae said. "Sit down." He sat. She poured his coffee without asking. He wrapped both hands around the mug and looked out the window at the snow-covered yard. After a moment he said, "How long has the roof been leaking?" Dorothy Mae looked at him. "Since last spring," she said. There was no point in anything other than a straight answer. She had the impression, confirmed over the previous evening, that Raymond Briggs was a man who received straight answers well and evasive ones poorly. He nodded. "Just the one spot?" "The back bedroom, too," Dorothy Mae said, smaller. "But the roofer said it would get worse." Raymond nodded again, looking at his coffee cup and the furnace. Dorothy Mae looked at him. "You don't miss much," she said. Raymond almost smiled. "Occupational habit," he said. "I've been in a lot of buildings." Dorothy Mae found this an interesting way to describe a habit, but let it pass. "Furnace went in November," she said. "The estimate was more than I had available at the time." She said it plainly, the way she said everything, not asking for anything, simply answering the question that had been asked. Raymond looked at her for a moment with those careful eyes. Then the other men began to stir in the living room, and the conversation shifted to the practical business of the morning, which was considerable. Delbert's hands had recovered well. The color was fully back, the numbness gone, and he flexed his fingers experimentally over his coffee mug, with the expression of a man who has been reminded not to take his hands for granted, and intends to honor that reminder. Curtis's arm was stiff and painful, but the wound was clean, and the bleeding had stopped, and Dorothy Mae told him, again firmly, that he needed stitches, and he told her again, respectfully, that he understood and would see to it as soon as the roads allowed. The biscuits came out of the oven, golden and fragrant, and Dorothy Mae put them on the table with butter, and the last of the strawberry preserves she had put up in July, and the 6 men ate with the uncomplicated gratitude of people who understood exactly what they were eating and what it had cost the person who made it. Hector ate 3 biscuits, and then looked at the empty plate as if he was slightly embarrassed about it, and Dorothy Mae told him there were 2 more in the oven, and watched the embarrassment resolve itself into simple happiness. It was during this second round of biscuits that Raymond's phone rang. He looked at the screen, excused himself, and stepped to the far end of the living room. Dorothy Mae could not hear the conversation from the kitchen, only the low, steady sound of Raymond's voice asking and answering. He was on the phone for perhaps 4 minutes. When he came back to the kitchen, his expression had not changed significantly, but something had shifted in it, some internal calculation completed. He sat back down. He looked at Dorothy Mae. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask," Dorothy Mae said. "What you did last night," he said, opening that door. "Feeding us, using your last stores, staying up all night to tend the fire and check on Curtis." He paused. "Why?" Dorothy Mae looked at him the way she looked at questions that seemed more complicated than they were. "Because you needed help," she said. That's the beginning and the end of it. Raymond was quiet for a moment. You didn't know who we were. I knew you were cold, Dorothy May said, and one of you was bleeding. She folded her hands on the table. I've lived in Harlan County for 50 years, Raymond. I know what the Hells Angels are. She looked at him steadily. I also know what a man looks like when he's trying to keep his people alive and running out of road to do it on. She paused. You looked like a man who needed a door opened, so I opened it. Raymond looked at her for a long time. The kitchen was quiet, except for the sound of the other men talking in the living room and the occasional sound of the house settling in the cold. Then he said, my full name is Raymond Ellis Briggs. He said it in the specific way a person says their full name when they are about to tell you something that changes the context of everything that has come before it. Not just Raymond the biker who slept on your floor. Raymond Briggs, who owns Briggs Industrial Group out of Lexington. Dorothy May looked at him without expression. We do construction, he said. Infrastructure primarily, roads, bridges, commercial builds. 7 states, he paused. I started it 28 years ago with a borrowed truck and a license I had just gotten and 3 guys who were willing to work for almost nothing because I could not yet afford to pay them for something. He looked at his coffee cup. Last year the company did about $400 million in revenue. Dorothy May was quiet. I still ride, Raymond said. I have ridden since I was 19 years old, and I will ride until I cannot anymore. The club is not separate from who I am. It is part of who I am. He looked at her. Willis understood that. He was the one who told me years ago that the best thing about riding was that it was the one place where nothing you had built in a boardroom followed you. Out on the road you were just a man on a bike. He almost smiled. He was right about that. He was right about most things. Dorothy May looked at the man sitting at her kitchen table in his socks, his silver beard, his worn leather vest with the death head patch, and she thought about the leather notebook she had noticed him pull from his jacket the previous evening, when he was writing something down, the kind of notebook she associated with boardrooms, rather than bar stools, and she thought about the way he had looked at the bucket in the hallway, and the plastic on the windows, the comprehensive systematic gaze of someone who was not just observing but assessing. Then she thought about the magazine. She was not sure why she thought about it right then, but something connected in the back of her mind, some loose thread that had been hanging there since the previous evening, finding something to attach to. She stood up and went to the kitchen table, the other side of it, the side against the wall, and she bent down and looked at the stack of old magazines and newspapers she kept under there to prop up the leg that had been uneven for 2 years. She pulled out the magazine near the bottom of the stack, a business magazine, 6 months old, that her daughter Renee had left on a visit, and that Dorothy May had repurposed without reading, because she had not been particularly interested in its contents at the time. She looked at the cover. There were 4 photographs arranged across the bottom of the cover under a headline that read, Building from the Ground Up, Unconventional Leaders Reshaping American Industry. The 3rd photograph from the left showed a broad-shouldered man with a silver beard and careful eyes, slightly younger looking than the man at her kitchen table, wearing a suit jacket over a collared shirt, looking at the camera with the composed directness of someone who was entirely comfortable being looked at. The caption below the photograph read Raymond Briggs, Briggs Industrial Group, Lexington, KY. Dorothy May stood up straight. She looked at the magazine. She looked at Raymond sitting at her kitchen table. She looked at the magazine again. Then she started to laugh. It was a real laugh, a full one, the kind that comes from somewhere unguarded, and Raymond looked at her with an expression of genuine surprise, because in the 12 hours he had known Dorothy May Simmons, she had been warm and capable and direct and occasionally fierce, but she had not laughed like this, and the sound of it was entirely unexpected. She carried the magazine to the table and set it in front of him, cover up, her finger on his photograph. Raymond looked at it, then he looked at her, then he started to laugh too, and the sound of 2 people laughing together in a kitchen at 7 in the morning after a blizzard brought 3 of the other men to the doorway to see what was happening. And when Curtis saw the magazine and looked at Raymond and back at Dorothy May, he shook his head slowly and said something under his breath that Dorothy May could not entirely hear, but that sounded like, you cannot make this up. I have been using your face to keep my kitchen table level for 6 months, Dorothy May told Raymond, which set off another round of laughter that took a moment to resolve itself. When it did, Raymond looked at her, with an expression that was still warm from the laughter, but underneath it had settled into something more serious and more intentional. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want to talk to you about something. and I need you to hear the whole thing before you tell me no." Dorothy May sat down. She folded her hands. "I am listening," she said. Raymond reached into his jacket, which was hanging on the back of his chair, and produced the leather notebook. He opened it to a page where he had written several things in a tight, precise hand. Dorothy May saw numbers, measurements, words she recognized as construction terminology. He had been writing while she thought he was simply sitting by the fire. She noted this without surprise. "Your roof," he said, "both spots. I want to send a crew. Full replacement, not a patch job. Proper flashing, new underlayment, the works." He looked at her. "Before you say anything, I am not doing this as charity. I am doing this because a woman who kept 6 men alive through a blizzard should not be catching rainwater in buckets in her own hallway." He held her gaze. "Those are two separate things. Help given freely and a response to that help. They do not cancel each other out." Dorothy May looked at him. "The furnace," he continued. "My company works with a mechanical contractor in Harlan. Good people. New furnace. Installed properly, before the end of next week." He paused. "The porch boards." He looked toward the front of the house. "2 boards near the steps. You have the lumber in the garage. I saw it this morning when I looked out back. My guys can have those in an afternoon." Dorothy May was quiet. Raymond turned a page in the notebook. "There is something else," he said, "and this one I thought about for most of the night, so I want to explain it carefully." He looked at her steadily. "You told me last night about the Abernathy children and Gerald Patterson and the school library fundraiser." He paused. "You described a woman who has been feeding this street and watching this neighborhood for decades, with no resources and no support and no recognition." He closed the notebook. "I want to change one of those things." Dorothy May said nothing. She was watching him with the careful attentiveness she brought to things that mattered. "There is a vacant commercial space on Main Street," he said, 2 storefronts down from the old hardware store. "It has been sitting empty for 4 years. Briggs Industrial purchased it last year as part of a downtown revitalization assessment we were doing for the county." He paused. "I want to convert it into a community kitchen and meal program. Full commercial kitchen, seating for 35, open 5 days a week. Hot meals, no cost to the people eating them." He looked at her. "And I want you to run it." Dorothy May looked at him. "Paid position," he said. "Not volunteer work. A salary, a real one, with a staff of 4 hired from this neighborhood. We cover operating costs for the first 3 years, full stop, rent, utilities, equipment, food supply, everything. After 3 years, we transition to a sustainable model with county partnerships that I will personally help you build." He leaned forward slightly. "You have been doing this work for decades with nothing. I am asking you to keep doing it with something behind you." Dorothy May looked at her hands on the table. She looked at James's chair, the one Raymond was sitting in. She looked at the oil lamp still burning on the counter from the night before, even though the morning light had made it unnecessary, because she had not gotten around to blowing it out. She was quiet for a long time. Raymond waited. He did not fill the silence. Finally she said, "The children in this neighborhood." She said it slowly, working something out as she spoke. "The Abernathy kids and the others. They have nowhere to go after school that is warm and supervised." She looked at him. "Could the kitchen have space for that? After the lunch service? A place for children to come and do their homework and have something to eat before their parents get home?" Raymond looked at her. He nodded once, a decisive nod. "Yes," he said. "We build that in from the start." Dorothy May was quiet again. Then she said, "My husband's name was James." She looked at James's photograph on the mantel. "He worked in this county for 30 years, and this county took his health and then his life and never gave him a single thing back." She paused. "If we name that kitchen, it is going to be called the James Simmons Community Kitchen." Raymond looked at her without hesitation. "Whatever you want to name it," he said. Dorothy May reached across the kitchen table and extended her hand, small and steady, the hand of a woman who had kneaded bread dough and wrung out mop heads, and held her husband's hand in a hospital room, and rubbed warmth back into a stranger's frostbitten feet in the middle of a blizzard. Raymond took it. His hand was twice the size of hers. They shook once, firm and clean. "Then we have a deal," Dorothy May said. The plows came through Sycamore Hollow Road at 9:30. Raymond had been outside for 20 minutes before they arrived. He and Hector and Deke working methodically through the snow on Dorothy May's front, walk-in porch steps, and driveway with the snow shovels she kept in the garage, not asking permission, simply doing the work that needed doing. Curtis supervised from the porch, his arm in the clean sling Dorothy May had fashioned from a dish towel, offering commentary that Hector told him was not helpful, and that Curtis provided anyway. When the street was passable, Raymond's road captain arrived in a truck with a trailer carrying 3 of the bikes they had managed to recover from the snowdrift on Route 9, shoulder. The other 2 would need to wait for a proper flatbed. There were phone calls, arrangements made, the practical logistics of 6 men and 7 motorcycles being redistributed from an unexpected location back towards something resembling their normal lives. Before they left, each man came to say goodbye to Dorothy May on the porch. Hector shook her hand and told her the biscuits were the best he had eaten since his grandmother died, which Dorothy May understood was the highest compliment available to him, and received it as such. Delbert showed her his hands, fully recovered, and told her he was going to send his wife the recipe for the stew if she would give it to him, and she wrote it on an index card from the kitchen drawer and tucked it into his jacket pocket. The quiet man Deke, who had shown her his tomato garden on his phone, told her he was going to bring her his heirloom Cherokee purple seeds in the spring, because they would do well in her garden beds, and he did not say this as a pleasantry, but as a statement of intention, which Dorothy May appreciated. Curtis was last. He stood on the porch with his slinged arm and looked at her for a moment with the expression she had seen on his face when she was cleaning his wound, that difficulty in processing, that rearrangement of understanding. "You didn't have to do any of this," he said. "I know that," Dorothy May said. Curtis looked at her, then he said, "My daughter, the one who wants to be a vet." He paused. "I want her to know about last night. Not the accident part, the other part." He paused again. "I want her to know that people like you exist." Dorothy May put her hand briefly on his good arm. "You call your daughter," she said, "and you get those stitches today, not tomorrow." "Today?" "Yes, ma'am," Curtis said. Raymond was last to come to the porch. He stood with his helmet under his arm and looked at the street, at the clean-shoveled walk, at the porch James had built in the summer of 1983, at the house that had kept them alive through the night. He turned to Dorothy May. "The crew will be here Thursday," he said. "For the roof. I will call you Wednesday evening with the details." Dorothy May nodded. Raymond reached into his jacket pocket and took out a card, plain white, just a name and a number, and held it out to her. "That is my direct line," he said. "Not an office, not an assistant. Me. If anything comes up before Thursday, you call it." Dorothy May took the card. She looked at it for a moment, then looked at him. "Raymond," she said. He looked at her. "You come back and see me," she said. "Not with a crew and not with a checkbook. Just come back sometime and have coffee." Something moved across Raymond's face, something that had to do with Willis, and the memorial ride, and the particular loneliness of a man who has built something large, and lost someone who understood the person he was before the something large existed. He nodded. "I will do that," he said. He walked down the clean-shoveled steps, and across the clean-shoveled walk, and got into the truck with his road captain. Dorothy May watched from the porch as the vehicles moved slowly down the still white street, and turned at the corner and were gone. She stood on the porch for a moment in the cold morning air. The sky had cleared fully overnight and was now that particular deep blue that only appears after a serious storm has exhausted itself, a blue so clean and final it looked like the sky was starting over. The snow on the rooftops caught the early sun and held it. Sycamore Hollow Road was silent and white and still. Dorothy May looked at the street for a long time. Then she went inside and blew out the oil lamp that had been burning on the kitchen counter since the night before. She poured fresh coffee. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the business card in her hand, and then at the spot on the wall where James's photograph hung on the mantel. And she said quietly to the photograph, as she said most things of significance, "You would not believe the night I just had." Then she picked up her coffee cup, and she looked out the window at the clean blue morning. And she thought about a vacant storefront on Main Street, and a commercial kitchen with room for 35, and children doing their homework at warm tables after school, and a sign above the door with James's name on it. She thought about all of this, and she felt something she had not felt in a long time, not since before the furnace broke, and the medical bill went in the drawer, and the roofer told her about the soft spot, and the world had settled into its slow grinding arithmetic. She felt like something was beginning. Barnabas jumped onto the table and sat in the patch of sunlight that had come through the kitchen window. Dorothy May scratched him behind the ear. He closed his eyes. Outside, Sycamore Hollow Road lay white and quiet and still. But inside the small house that James had bought in 1961 and built his porch onto in 1983 and lived in until a Tuesday afternoon in October 9 years ago, something had changed. Something had been set in motion that was going to take a while to fully arrive, the way all things worth waiting for take a while to fully arrive. Dorothy May Simmons finished her coffee. Then she got up and started thinking about what she was going to plant in the spring. Thursday came with clear skies and cold air, and a Briggs industrial truck that pulled onto Sycamore Hollow Road at 7:45 in the morning, carrying 4 men, a loaded roof rack, and enough material to do the job properly. Dorothy May was on the porch with her coffee when they arrived, which was not because she had been waiting, but because she was always on the porch with her coffee at 7:45 in the morning, and the fact that a roofing crew was pulling up did not change a habit of 30 years. The foreman was a young man named Terrence, broad-shouldered and serious, who shook Dorothy May's hand and told her they expected to finish by end of day, and that they would be as careful as possible around the back porch. Dorothy May told him she appreciated that, and pointed out the lumber in the garage for the porch steps while she was at it, and Terrence looked at the boards and nodded and said they would see what they could do. Raymond called that evening, as he said he would, to ask how it had gone, and Dorothy May told him it had gone well, and that Terrence had fixed the porch steps without being asked a second time, and that the house felt different already, with the plastic sheeting down from the windows. Just different, lighter somehow. The way a room feels when something has been removed from it that you had stopped noticing was there. Raymond said he was glad. There was a pause on the line that was comfortable, rather than awkward. The pause of two people who have already established that they can share silence without it meaning anything is wrong. Then he said the furnace crew was confirmed for Monday, and Dorothy May said she would be home, and they said goodnight. The furnace went in on Monday. Dorothy May stood in the basement and watched the mechanical contractor's team work and asked questions that the lead technician answered with the respect he would give any person who was genuinely trying to understand what was being done in their own house. When the system came on for the first time and warm air moved through the vents, Dorothy May stood in the hallway with her eyes closed for a moment and felt it against her face. Then she went to the kitchen drawer and took out the roofer's estimate and the medical bill, and she put them in the recycling bin, not dramatically, just as a matter of housekeeping, because they no longer represented unsolved problems, and there was no reason to keep them. She called Renee that Sunday and told her about the blizzard and the bikers and Raymond Briggs and all of it, and the call ran 45 minutes past its usual length, because Renee kept stopping her to ask questions and make sounds of disbelief that Dorothy May found both understandable and slightly excessive. She called Marcus the following Sunday and told him the same story, and Marcus was quiet for a long time at the end of it, and then said, "Mama, only you." And Dorothy May said, "Well, somebody had to open the door," and Marcus laughed and said that was the most you thing she had ever said, and she told him she was going to take that as a compliment. The James Simmons Community Kitchen opened on a Wednesday morning in April, when the redbuds were blooming along the creek, and the air had that particular soft quality of early Kentucky spring that makes everything look slightly more possible than it did in February. The renovation of the Main Street storefront had taken 11 weeks, and Dorothy May had visited the site every Thursday during that time, walking through the construction progress with Terrence, who had been assigned to the project and who had, by this point, developed the specific patience of a man who understood that the person he was walking through the site with was going to have opinions about everything, and that those opinions were going to be correct often enough to take seriously. She had opinions about the kitchen layout, about the placement of the serving line, about the height of the tables relative to the chairs, so that elderly people could sit comfortably, about the lighting in the after-school area, which she wanted warm rather than institutional, about the sign above the door, which she had designed herself on a piece of notebook paper, and handed to Terrence with the instruction that she wanted, it hand-lettered, not printed, because James had believed that things made by hand lasted longer than things made by machine, and she saw no reason to start disagreeing with him now. The sign above the door was hand-lettered. It read the James Simmons Community Kitchen in clean dark letters on a cream background, and below that, in smaller letters, "Come in. There is enough." Dorothy May stood on the sidewalk and looked at it for a long time, on the morning it went up. Terrence stood beside her. After a while he said, he would have liked it. Dorothy May looked at him. "You didn't know him," she said. Terrence said, "No, ma'am, but I know you, and that is close enough." Dorothy May looked back at the sign. "Yes," she said quietly. "I suppose it is." Opening day brought 214 people through the door. The Abernathy children came after school and sat at the warm tables, and did their homework and ate, and were still there when their mother came to collect them at 5:30, and their mother stood in the doorway of the after-school block and looked at her children sitting at a warm table with their school books open and food in front of them. and she covered her mouth with her hand for a moment before she came in. Dorothy May pretended not to notice. She had learned a long time ago that some moments of grace needed to be received privately, to be received fully. Gerald Patterson came on the third day, walked the 14 steps from his house to the kitchen on his bad hip without asking anyone to drive him, and sat down at a corner table and ate a full hot meal for the first time in weeks, and told Dorothy May that James would be beside himself with pride, and Dorothy May told him to stop it, or she was going to ruin the soup with salt water, and Gerald laughed until he coughed and then kept laughing. Raymond came on the second Friday, not with a crew and not with a checkbook. He came on his bike, alone in his leather cut, and parked on Main Street, and walked in and sat at the counter and ordered whatever was going. Dorothy May put a bowl of beef stew in front of him and cornbread on the side, and poured his coffee without asking because she had already learned how he took it. They talked for an hour after the lunch service wound down, about Willis, about the route they had been riding when the storm hit, about a piece of land Raymond had been thinking about outside of town that might do well for something, he wasn't sure what yet, maybe a community garden, maybe something else, he was still thinking. Dorothy May told him about a family 3 streets over that had been struggling since the father lost his job at the factory, 3 children under 10, the mother doing what she could. Raymond listened the way he always listened, fully and without interruption, and Dorothy May could see him making the notation, filing it away, beginning to think. She did not ask him to do anything. She simply told him, because she had learned that Raymond Briggs was a man who needed to know where the problems were, and that once he knew, he would find his own way toward them. He came back the following Friday, and the Friday after that. By summer, Friday morning at the James Simmons Community Kitchen had a regular rhythm to it. Raymond on his stool at the counter, Dorothy May on the other side with her coffee, the street outside coming awake through the wide front windows, the kitchen staff, all 4 of them from the neighborhood, moving through the prep work with the competent ease of people who had found their place in a thing and settled into it. The sound of children arriving for the after-school session drifting in from the back room where Terence had built the bookshelves, Dorothy May had specified, floor to ceiling, already filling with donated books from the county library drive that she had organized in March. One morning in August, Deke arrived with a flat of Cherokee purple tomato seedlings in the back of his truck and spent 2 hours helping Dorothy May put in a kitchen garden in the raised beds that Terence had built along the south wall of the building. They planted in comfortable near silence, Deke explaining the particular soil needs of each variety, Dorothy May asking questions with the focused attention she brought to anything she had decided to learn. By the time they finished, the flat was empty and the beds were full, and Deke's hands were dark with good Kentucky soil, and Dorothy May made him wash them at the outdoor spigot before she let him back inside for coffee. In September, the first fall afternoon that carried the specific cool clarity of a season changing, Dorothy May was closing up the kitchen alone when she heard a knock at the glass door. She looked up. Raymond was standing outside in his cut, helmet under his arm, a small paper bag in his hand. She unlocked the door. He held out the bag. "Peaches," he said, "from a farm stand on Route 9. He paused. "Near where we went down in February." He looked at her. "I rode past it today on the way here." He said it simply, the way he said things that meant more than their surface. Dorothy May took the bag. She looked at him. "You went back to the route," she said. Raymond nodded. "First time since that night." His voice was steady. "It's a good road," he said. "Willis was right about that. It's a good road. Just not in February." Dorothy May looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped back and held the door open. "Come in," she said. "I'll make coffee." Raymond came in. Dorothy May put the peaches on the counter and started the coffee. Outside the windows, the September light came down through the Main Street trees in long late afternoon angles, and the kitchen smelled like the day's cooking and the lingering warmth of a room that had been full of people. Raymond sat at the counter and looked at the sign on the wall above the serving line, the one Dorothy May had put up on opening day, the one she had written herself on an index card in her careful handwriting and had Terence frame in plain wood. It read, the words as the sign above the door, "Come in. There is enough." Raymond looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Dorothy May, her back to him. Pouring coffee in the kitchen, she ran on a dead-end street's worth of stubbornness and 50 years of showing up for people without asking anything back. "That night in February," he said. His voice was quiet. "I had been riding for 34 years. He paused. "That was the first time I was genuinely afraid." Dorothy May turned and set his coffee in front of him. "What were you afraid of?" she asked. Raymond looked at his hands. "That I wasn't going to get people home." he said. Dorothy May looked at him. But you did, she said. Raymond looked up. With help, he said. Dorothy May nodded once, small and certain, the nod of a woman who understood the full weight of what was being said and received it without making it larger than it needed to be. She picked up her own coffee cup and looked out the window at the September street. A child came running past the window chasing something, a ball or a dog, too fast to tell, laughing at full volume, the way children laugh, when they have forgotten anyone can hear them. They both watched the child pass, and then the street was quiet again. Dorothy May smiled, soft and private, the smile of a woman who had opened a door in a blizzard and found, on the other side of it, something she had not known she was waiting for. She took a sip of her coffee. Raymond took a sip of his. Outside, the September light held a little longer, the way it does at the end of summer, as if the season itself is reluctant to let go of something good. Inside there was coffee. There was enough. There always had been.